Why do I like opera? I feel like just the way you phrased that, maybe cut this out of the podcast, but was like, why do you like to sing from the Royal Singers of Dying?
Because it's so much fun to sing. Hello, my good people. My name's Aurora. My pronouns are she, her.
My name's Kelley, and my pronouns are also she, her.
So today, Kelley and I are going to do a special opera-themed Tortall recall episode. And you might ask, an opera-themed episode on a Tortall-themed podcast? Why? Well, that's a good question. And we're going to get into that bit by bit, first by talking about our backgrounds and what's really influenced us and why we enjoy the kind of media and art that we enjoy. And then we'll go into the connections between opera, which is what we're talking about today, and Tortall recall, which is what we talk about most of the time with you all. So I think we're going to start by talking about a little bit of background on our interests and kind of how our life shapes how we read Alanna, and then draw opera into that.
That sounds good. I mean, of course, the real reason that we're talking about opera on a Tortall-themed podcast is because we want to. But,
I think the idea is that we do Tortall recall because there are a lot of bits in the Tortall universe that were formative, and they're things that we really loved growing up and that we love to re-examine. And I think that's the same with opera, at least for the two of us. And so we get to bring them together, and it does give us a nice platform to share some good fun opera things.
Oh, yay!
With everybody. With the internet.
Okay, Aurora, why don't you introduce yourself first a little more?
Okay, so growing up as a kid, and I guess still now, there were a few things that I really, really enjoyed, and those were A of all, books, and B of all, music. And so the books part is a lot of what you've heard about. You've heard us talk about Alanna and like that part of like our literary pasts. But as a young child, I like really enjoyed like sci-fi, fantasy, and especially books with strong female characters that could be like good role models and self-inserts. But then the other half of that was, in addition to reading books as a kid, I was in like a lot of choirs. I studied voice a little bit in high school, and then in college that was also a lot of what I did. And so those are two of the things that shape kind of the media I consume, and in part the things that I do with my life and the perspectives I have. Your turn, Kelley.
Okay. I'm Kelley again. Growing up, I liked several things. A of all animals, B of all books, C of all music. And in college, I studied mostly biology and animals, and then also music again. And something that Aurora and I went to the same college, and something we did together was sing a lot of opera and go watch a lot of opera. So we're very big opera co-enthusiasts. And right now I'm doing ecology as my job and applying for PhD programs, which is partially why I have not been on any of the podcasts so far. I guess my sort of perspective on the Alanna books is similar to Aurora. I love fiction, and I love books with strong female protagonists. And I also love books with animals in them, which is why I'm super duper excited about the next installment of our podcast.
Oh, yeah, no. The Dane books are going to be amazing. I'm so pumped.
Yeah, so super big animal conservation enthusiast. Excited to see how that plays out when I read the Dane books for the first time critically in my entire life, as opposed to the other 20 times when I've read them non-critically and just been like, animals, animals, animals. Yeah.
Very good.
So that's me. And one thing that we wanted to sort of start this podcast with was talking about why we liked opera, because I think we can both recognize that although opera is something we really enjoy, it definitely has a facet to it that is like really problematic, where it's a medium that is enjoyed by a lot of really privileged people. The major repertoire that's played now is by white European men who are from several hundred years ago. So I guess what we want to talk about are the things we like about opera and sort of like the good things that we see in it really briefly. So Aurora, why don't you go first?
Oh, that's an excellent summary. So there's of course the musical element that we're drawn to, but also I enjoy the way that if you look at a lot of old operas, while there are some, like, think Magic Flute, that have some exceedingly problematic elements, like real gross sexism, you also have some really interesting instances in, like, if you look at like Marriage of Figaro, for example, you see interesting ways in which gender presentation and like gender roles, etc., played themselves out in ways that perhaps were less expected at the time when these operas were written. And you do get to see, you know, a lot of strong characters. You get all of the strong emotion that you would expect in opera. It's never quite as surface level as it initially comes off as. And there are so many good operas that have interesting female characters or characters canonically played by women who are known for being strong, clever, and like all around kind of kick each in their own way. So, Kelley, why do you like opera?
Yeah, why I like opera for a lot of similar reasons to you. I love the music, and honestly, I really got introduced to opera when I really liked singing when I was younger, and really loved musical theater, but don't really have a good voice for singing musical theater, which was sort of crushing in high school and middle school, and then in like late high school when my voice teacher was like, oh, you should sing opera instead. So I kind of threw myself into that as like a way to heal from not being able to be a musical theater superstar. But I grew to really like the music and really kind of adore the ridiculousness of opera plots, because opera plots are like the most overblown soap operas you could possibly imagine. Like, oh my god, I've been spited by my lover, now I'm gonna like throw myself off a cliff and curse him for eternity and all his descendants, which can be like kind of annoying in a lot of ways, but it's also amazing if you just go along for the ride and appreciate how ridiculous it is. And also, I agree with you that while a lot of operas have like really problematic themes, at the same time they were sort of the popular media of their day. So there's a lot of stuff that was really like revolutionary for the time period too. Like you said, some women being like more in control of opera plots than you would imagine, and being sort of like tricky and like manipulating other people in like a way where it's like, wow, this woman's really the one who's in charge. Or even also in the Marriage of Figaro, like there was a huge like sort of upheaval of like traditional class behaviors, and that was revolutionary for its time as well. So I think you can appreciate things like that, and then also they're really fun to watch.
So true.
And laugh at. And also have some really beautiful music. So now I guess we want to transition away from opera fangirling, which we can do for hours, towards talking about how we're going to relate opera to Alanna. So Aurora, take it away.
Yeah, the big question is, how are we going to take opera, which seems like a very, very different genre from these Alanna books we've been talking about, and connect it to opera? Well, today we're going to be talking specifically about pants roles, or also known as trouser roles, in opera. And so just a very, very brief summary for those of you who aren't familiar with them, but trouser roles are roles that are canonically played by women, usually mezzo-sopranos, sopranos, contraltos, in which they play men. But why pants roles, you ask? It ties into Alanna in that it gives us, we can compare the different ways that gender, the portrayal of gender and the performance of gender are seen across different mediums.
Well, also Aurora and I are like kind of both personally obsessed with pants roles, because our voice types both like enable us to sing them, and they're super duper fun. Like pants role characters are usually like the best, like most awesome character to play at an opera.
No, it's so true. You get swords and awesome vocal lines. Like, who doesn't want a sword?
Yeah, and like you get to be like super charming and everybody loves you. Anyway, okay, so the history of pants roles. So the history of pants roles is actually really interesting, because approaching opera, even though I said it was sort of like the popular medium of its time and therefore sort of revolutionary, I feel like thinking back on like the time period that a lot of early operas were written, I wouldn't have expected there to be like gender bending on the stage, because the world was more conservative. So the way that came about is actually pretty interesting. In the late Renaissance, there was this preference for high-voiced heroes in opera. So the audience sort of expected both male and female singers who were like in leading roles, who were playing like gods and kings or whatever, to have high voices, because high voices were like closer to the divine. So these roles were usually played by castrati, which were castrated men. So they had these really high soprano voices. And sort of like a unique sound too, because they also had like the physical build of men, so they had a lot of power behind this interesting soprano voice. However, sort of at the beginning of the 1800s, that practice fell out of fashion for a variety of reasons. but people still sort of had like the oral preference for high-voiced male heroes. So opera composers kind of continued to write their male heroes having like really high-voiced soprano, mezzo-soprano, which is the like voice type that's slightly lower than soprano roles. And instead of men, women started filling these roles. So these were kind of some of the first generation of pants roles, and they're really cool because it's like they're like traditional male heroes, knights and like princes and stuff, but they're just sung by female singers. And sort of in the middle of the 1800s / at the beginning, there was a shift away from this, as in like larger society, gender roles became a little bit more defined in Europe, and also as an opera, there started to be sort of a shift towards listener preference for tenors playing the heroic male roles. Huh. So then sort of like these female singers were sort of booted aside, tenors took the male roles, and there started to be sort of a new type of pants role, which was female singers playing young boys, with sort of like the idea that like young boys aren't like developed men, so who better to play them than women? And, you know, women's voices are soprano like a young boy's might be. So then there was this huge like influx of women playing mostly like page boy trouser roles, the most famous of which is Carabino in La Notte di Figaro, who is a literal page boy. And I think we're going to definitely relate this to Alanna a bit as well, because she is a literal page boy. Oh. And one sort of interesting footnote, so that's like the majority of pants roles. An interesting footnote is sort of by the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, as like society's view of sexuality evolved more, so did it evolve in opera, and there started to be more major roles for pants role singing women again. So like they sort of started becoming main characters again, and actually like were able to perform like way more interesting like bits of sexuality on stage. Like there were like female pants role characters who literally were supposed to be having like sex on stage with other female singers, which is really interesting. But anyway, I'm going to cut off the history of pants roles there, but it's super cool. You can definitely read more about it if you're interested.
Is that like Rosenkavalier was considered pretty risque?
Yeah, it's literally the beginning of Rosenkavalier because the overture is like supposed to be them having sex.
Essentially, yeah, no. I mean, apparently they had to change the staging for certain audiences. Like, I think classically Strauss wanted them to start the staging with like, you know, a bed being kind of at the center of the stage with the Marschallin, who's this countess, and Octavian, a younger man there. But in staging it, the time when it was released, which was like the early 1900s, they had to replace it with a couch. Because apparently a bed was just too much for those audiences to handle. But now in modern stagings, they put it back where it belongs.
On the bed.
Yes.
Okay. Opera's so fun. I guess, so I'm gonna let Aurora talk a little bit more about how we want to talk about sort of relating these pants roles where women are performing another gender on stage to Alanna and her being a woman performing a man, performing a page boy. Take it away, Aurora.
Hey, all right. So now we've discussed two mediums. So we have a musical one in opera and a written one we have in books. And in both of these, we see multiple levels of, you know, gender representation, interpretation, and construction. And when we look in particular at, you know, Alanna and that series and pants roles, we can really examine how this practice of portraying a performance of gender in media can be seen across these different mediums, which is cool. Also, I think it's hilarious, as Kelley pointed out, that our kind of most classic pants role, which is essentially Carabino, this page boy, is kind of like Alanna, a page boy. Our most direct connection. But at the same time, I think it's interesting to explore, you know, the different ways you can look at how gender is portrayed in these, and then look at it at kind of different scales. So, what scales can you look at this at, you might ask? Well, of course, you can start at one level. You do have your author, and in the case of opera, you have your librettist and your composer who write characters. And they're writing them to be kind of read a certain way, and all of this is, you know, of course, within their personal context, the time they're inhabiting that social context. And then you can layer on this in opera. You have additional factors that go into how gender is portrayed. You have decisions made kind of contemporaneously by the director, the actors, the singers, and that shapes this. And then, last of all, and I think most importantly, you have the people who are watching these productions and consuming this media, and how they filter it through their own experiences in that particular time period, and then what they get out of this. So, if we bring it back to Alanna, I think, and the operas in which we have pants rolls, the most obvious connection between the two of these is, in both of these cases, we have people who are, very overtly performing gender, in the sense that in these operas, you have female singers who are expected to, go on stage and perform how they think a male character would act. And that's, of course, filtered through how they believe this would be. And at the same time, in Alanna, well, I guess in Alanna you have how Alanna thinks a page should act in her world. And you also have how Tamara Pierce thinks that Alanna thinks that, yeah, haha, death of the author. And so in a sense, these are very similar because they do show how people are acting or performing how they think gender should be embodied in a particular moment. But what I really love about these, and especially about pants rolls, is that no matter what our composer's intentions, or in the case of Alanna, our author's intentions, we as the audience really get to interpret these roles through our own eyes and experience, and that's why things like pants rolls were so revolutionary and why they did so many things in terms of gender in the history of opera.
Well, I can jump in for a second and add something to what you said in the middle there, which is you said part of a woman playing a pants roll is her performing sort of what she thinks a male gender should be. And I want to say that goes extraordinarily literally. When I've been coached by people on how to perform pants rolls, they've literally told me, make the lines of your body sharper because men have sharper lines when they move than women, and stand with your feet pointed diagonally outward and things like that. So there's a whole lot of performance practice that goes into performing gender, which I think is super interesting.
Totally. For the briefest times, I did a little bit of carabino, and I was told to, act like you're taking up more space, which is really interesting if you think of taking up space as something that is gendered, which, it shouldn't be, but, in today's world. So that's an interesting part of it as well. I think it's also interesting how it would be no fun if we didn't discuss this, but I think especially in opera, we kind of see composers, or I guess librettists, really playing with this, in that you have pants rolls, so women playing men, who at some point in the opera dress up as a woman. Mm-hmm. And so I think in this sense, they're kind of pointing at how what they're doing is really a construct and a performance, which is cool and interesting. So you see this in Marriage of Figaro. Caravino dresses up as a maid. Yeah, he's hiding. He's a little page boy, and he's trying to flirt with one of the maids in the palace, who is actually the main character, one of the main characters, Susanna. But then somebody's coming into her room, and she's like, oh, this young man can't be discovered here, so they dress him up as a maid, so it looks like he's just another maid. Mm-hmm. And then we see something similar in Rosenkavalier, where Octavian is, I believe, in the Marschallin's chambers, but doesn't want to be discovered, so...
And her husband's coming back, so they dress him up also as a maid.
So it's kind of a classic opera trope, but I think it shows how perhaps conscious composers were of the construction of gender in their productions, which is cool.
Yeah, one of my favorite thing about pants rolls, the thing that I'm really super 100% obsessed with, I think can also be related to Alanna, which is sort of the story of a female opera character is the story of a dying tragic heroine. At the end of La Boheme, she gets consumption and she dies, and at the end of La Traviata she gets consumption and she dies, and at the end of Madame Butterfly she kills herself and she dies, at the end of Tosca she jumps off a parapet and she dies. They all die. I mean, not everybody, but in dramatic operas, the female character does inevitably die. And, like, despite what we said earlier about women in opera a lot of times having a lot of agency and sort of being, like, the sort of, like, manipulator behind the plot and being, like, usually the protagonist and the, like, sympathetic character, there are a lot of things that they just aren't able to do. They don't perform what someone looking at an opera might think of as, like, traditional male heroic actions. And that is why I think pants rolls are so interesting, because it gives the woman performing them this opportunity to be a traditional male hero. Like in the earlier pants rolls where they're actually playing like knights and kings and princes, they're literally a traditional male hero. Like they get to do everything. Like they get to go questing, they get to like save their love, which is another woman. Like they get to be male heroes in a space where women, both in opera portraying women and probably in like the public sphere, didn't get to perform those sorts of heroic masculine actions. And I think that's sort of like how Alanna, that's exactly how Alanna's like using performing another gender. It's to sort of break out of like the traditional female sphere and perform these sorts of actions that are usually like prescribed for another gender, and to give herself more power and sort of like borrow that traditionally masculine power.
Yeah, totally. And I think these in Alanna, in the context of Alanna, and even in like the greater world of opera and Western European tradition, it kind of shows slowly an expansion of how women get to do more stuff.
Yeah.
Which is good and exciting. I had a question for you, Kelley, actually, about something I ran into on the internet last night when I was just doing some Googling.
Okay.
But have you ever heard of the term mezzosexual?
No, I love it. Oh my god, that's amazing. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
Yeah, so...
I'm dying.
Isn't it so good?
Oh my god. Oh my god. You've killed me.
Yeah,
That's so
so I
great.
just wanted to put that out there because I think a lot of the discussions in the world at large now talking about kind of pants rolls and gender and sexuality in opera, you know, they're beginning to explore these issues a little more deeply. And so they've been proposing, this was an example of one of the terms that they applied to pants rolls. And I don't know, A, I loved it, and B, it seemed very appropriate for this discussion. So I think they talked about it in the context of mezzos, in a sense of being, you know, mezzo means like between.
And for context, mezzo-sopranos are usually the voice type that sing pants rolls.
Yeah. So it fits very nicely in that. And so it's like, it really pinpoints kind of this in-betweenness of the idea of a pants roll, in that it's a woman playing a male, sometimes playing a woman, and just kind of highlights the in-betweenness of like the gender and the sexuality portrayed within this sphere, which I thought was cool. Also just a great little term. And I think the cool thing about pants rolls is that they are very much, their interpretation is something that's so flexible.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah, so in the sense that as the performance of these operas move through time, kind of the different interpretations that audiences, you know, had and were allowed were then thus like doubly shaped by changes in social contexts, which is cool. So like you're perhaps allowed to not allowed. People interpret things however they want to, which is what we love about it.
But there's more of a framework for them to interpret.
Exactly. So, you know, these roles can take on a new context now that they are in our modern society, which is cool and neat.
Yeah. And what's absolutely, like, awesome and, like, crazy to think about is, like, even in, like, the early 1800s, you were seeing, like, these women on stage portraying, like, people who are madly in love with other women, which, like, way cool. Yeah, and pants roll characters are, like, also often really popular characters with audiences, so...
Because they're great.
Because they're great, and, like, also, I've heard it argued, too, they sort of, like, because they, like, inhabit this gender-bending rule-breaking space, they like kind of have a like weird sort of erotic like fascination thing going on where people like see them breaking the rules of gender, and that makes them really interesting on stage for like audiences, which I'm not going to talk too much about because I haven't studied like gender and sexuality theory, so I feel like I can't do it justice, but that's something really cool that people have talked about.
Same. Yeah, so there is, if you are curious about exploring this further, there is a ton of literature that one can look into.
Yeah, well, I think one of my favorite books was called En Travesti, which is E-N-Travesti. Travesti is another word for, like, trouser rolls. And it talked a lot about gender and sexuality and these roles. Anyway, so let's segue into each mentioning at least one favorite pants role and sort of how briefly that relates to Alanna. Okay, Aurora, you go first. I'm so excited.
Okay, so I was kind of torn, because there are a lot of pants roles that are really great. But for the moment, I'm going to go with my fave pants role that kind of relates to Alanna, being Octavian.
Oh, sweet! I didn't think you were going to go there. Okay.
From Rose and Cavalier. Well, I almost chose Sesto from Giulio Cesare, because, like,
oh, love
what
Sesto.
a bomb pants role.
Awesome.
Like, you know, fabulous vocal music, has a sword, like, one of the most prominent characters. Anyway, but Octavian. So Octavian is a character from Rose and Cavalier. It is kind of like a later parallel to Cherubino-like characters. So Octavian is a young man, I think portrayed to be like in his late teens, probably like 17, 18, and he is in love and having an affair with this older woman, the Marshallin. And then he later falls in love with a younger woman, and there's all this, you know, like heart-wrenching drama. But aside from that, this is one of those roles that really highlights how the pants role constructs and deconstructs portrayals of gender. I kind of like Cherubino, except I think I prefer Octavian as a character.
Yeah.
So Octavian is canonically played by a woman, but we see him, for example, as we mentioned before, there is a scene in which he dresses up as a woman to avoid being discovered in the Marshallins' chambers. And there's like some table flipping there where like there's this terrible character, the Baron, who's like really nasty to women and who is being very gross to Octavian, who is then dressed as the maid. And it kind of gives Octavian's like, unlike Cherubino, who's just like girl crazy, Octavian comes at this with more of like a caring, respectful place with regard to the way that he deals with women. And he has some of the most beautiful duets in like the history of opera. I mean, there are a lot of good duets, but it has some nice ones. Kelley, what's your fave pants role?
So I'm going to go really cliche here, and I'm going to say, because Octavian might be another favorite, but I want to talk about Cherubino because I feel like we keep referencing him, and maybe people don't know what we're talking about, and also I literally love him. So Cherubino is from Le Nozze di Figaro, which is The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart, which is an opera with an incredibly convoluted plot, like many other operas. But in broad strokes, it takes place in a rich nobleman's house, and sort of like delves into the lives of him and his wife and a lot of his servants and like people, as like two of his servants are trying to get married and he's trying to not have them get married. So Cherubino in this context is the page boy, and his main characteristic is that he just hit puberty and he loves literally every woman ever. So Cherubino spends most of the opera running after every woman in the house and being in love with them. And he's great. He's so charming. He's so cute. I love Cherubino. He's the best. And I guess he's sort of like the most well-known pants role because the opera itself is so well-known, and also because he sort of plays a central and very charming role. Everybody loves Cherubino. I promise. If you watch, you will also love Cherubino. He's so cute. Yeah, and I guess sort of relating that to Alanna, like, he's a page boy. He's a literal page boy, and sort of, like, the reason why, maybe one of the reasons why that is, like, so successful as a pants role is, like, it's, like, a young man being portrayed by, like, a young woman. So, like, in this interesting sort of, like, in between, like, male and female, like, gender space. I don't know. I think I didn't say that very well, but...
It's all good. I also totally forgot to tie mine to Alanna, but page boys, young men, yes.
So he's sort of like a man, but yet not a man, and he's also a page boy. Not that he really does anything page boy-like, he just runs after women. But I love Cherubino, he's great. So I guess, Aurora, unless you had any more thoughts that you wanted to think, I think we wanted to wrap this up by recommending maybe an opera or two in case you guys got really excited about opera after us talking about them and wanted to check some out.
Yeah, sure. So I of course have 100 opera recommendations, but for those of you who are beginners to opera and would like a, you know, a kind of like the opera starter pack, I would recommend, and especially if you want to see, you know, a pants role in real life, I would recommend Marriage of Figaro, which we've discussed at length here, because it's really, It has a great story, so it combines a lot of humor. It has the classic, like, love triangles, and I think also importantly, it's one of those stories where you have characters who are socially at a disadvantage, so namely the female characters and the servants, they really run the show in this. And the characters have depth, they're clever, and they win. So it's great. If you want to watch an opera, that is one I would recommend. Kelley?
Oh my gosh. Well, that was going to be one of my recommendations as well. But fortunately, I have another one. The opera that I'm going to recommend also has a pants roll in it. And I might just be recommending it because I'm obsessed with it. But I am recommending Die Fledermaus.
Yes!
Which is actually an operetta. So that means that it has some dialogue. It isn't all sung. But I love Die Fledermaus. It is so good.
It's hilarious.
It is also hilarious. It's by Johann Strauss and was a little bit later in the 1800s it was written, and it's sort of similar to Le Nozze di Figaro, like features like characters at like different levels of like social strata and sort of like their interactions and lots of like love triangles and like intrigue, but it's centered around like a New Year's Eve ball, so it's very festive. There's a lot of beautiful waltzy music from Strauss, who is the writer of the Blue Danube, so probably heard the waltz, and it is fantastic. And it also features a pants roll. The prince who's throwing the New Year's Eve party is a pants roll, Prince Orlovsky, and he is a ridiculous boy and really fun to watch. And I would personally recommend the version with Kirite Kanawa playing the Countess. I think she's also the Countess.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. And you can find it on YouTube. Or like watch it legally somewhere. But
so I have a list of recs because I couldn't really pick one, and that was on there because boy is it great. So good.
Yeah. Opera's a lot of fun. We love opera. I guess one thing I would say is, one thing that we noted at the beginning about opera that I think is worth mentioning again is really basically all of the opera and the operatic canon is written by dead European white men. But there are a fair number of new operas being written that have been written in more recent decades by women. So if you're interested, you can also go check those out. Cold Mountain, who is written by, I can't remember, maybe Higdon. Breaking the Waves, which I would say if you do want to go see it, it portrays both sexual and physical violence, so be warned, but also written by a woman. And a couple others.
Yeah, so there are some cool operas out there that are being written by women right now that you can go watch if you like modern opera.
So we had a lot of fun talking with you guys about opera today, and we hope you enjoyed listening at least a little bit. Thanks for indulging us. If you have any more questions about opera, Aurora and I are always super duper happy to talk about it. So just tweet at us, I guess.
You can reach us on Twitter. Like, you can either tweet my personal Twitter, or you can tweet us at Tortall Recall, and you can email us at tortallrecall@gmail.com. We also have a website, tortallrecall.com, and I believe we have Tumblr, which is Tortall Recall. So if you want to get in touch with us, feel free to get in touch with us any of those ways, and we would be happy to field any questions you have about opera, or kind of continue this discussion as well, because we love it.
We love it. We love opera. Opera is awesome. Yeah. We love Alanna. Alanna is awesome. Bye, Tortellini. Okay. I guess maybe we should not just list off a million operas that we love. So